All right. Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to do this program called Party Smart. Typically, what I do when I talk about risk management, talk about partying, talking about events that involve alcohol, what I typically do when I'm in person is I kind of like to reverse engineer these parties. What I mean by that is, let's think about the typical party that we might have. We have people over at our house or in our backyard. There's alcohol involved. What does that event look like? What are the things that we kind of think about to make that event successful from all different perspectives, right? So it's about managing risk and making sure everyone's safe. It's about ensuring that we don't get in trouble, whether with the school or with the police, our neighbors, right? We're respectful of our neighbors, and also that we're having fun, right? Because that's what it's about. So, but we just need to make sure that we can have fun while keeping our guests safe, keeping our party a safe atmosphere, and then we don't have any issues. So that's what I'm going to talk about in today's program. Just doing it a little bit differently than I typically would in person. So I've titled this program "Party Smart" because I think that's what it's about. Partying is not a bad thing. I think we just have to think about how we do it in a way that keeps everybody happy and safe. So, worst case scenario, right? Let's start there. So, we are still kind of reverse engineering here. What are some of the issues that we typically have when we think about problems that might happen as a result of having a party, having a gathering, particularly when alcohol is involved? So, some of the things that I've kind of come up with in general that I see are overconsumption, right? Folks drinking too much, right? And how does that actually happen? Not the obvious how does that happen, you drink too much, but how have we created a situation where that can happen and that's allowed, right? Noise, right? Noise issues. Our neighbors end up calling the police because it's 1 in the morning and we're being too loud. Maybe that's because of the music. Maybe that's because people are gathering outside. Or maybe it's simply because the party's over, people are going to their car and they've had a few too much to drink and they're yelling and things like that, right? These are some of the issues that we typically see with noise that we really want to try to avoid. Public urination and vomiting. We like to think this stuff doesn't happen, but trust me, it does, right? We've had issues like that in the past where, maybe a party's outside and someone might just go around the house and decide that they're going to go to the bathroom on the side of the house, right? In clear shot of a neighbor's window. And that'd be considered public urination. So that's a problem. That's something that we can't have happen at any of our events, right? What does that say about our organization if people were to see that? Destruction of property. This probably happens few and far between, if at all, but it has happened before, even on our campus. And that might be something simple as someone breaking a door or bumping into a window and breaking a pane of glass, right? But that still counts as destruction of property, right? How are we setting up our events and are having situations where that can happen, right? And typically that is connected to overconsumption, right? Fighting is something that sometimes is hard to control, but again, that goes back to who we have invited to our parties and the situations that people are in and how we're respectful of each other. So we'll talk about that as well. Sexual assault, really serious one, right? We never want to think that a sexual assault can occur um, with involving any of our events, any of our members, any of our friends or guests at our events. But they do happen around the United States. We need to ensure that the parties, the events that we have, are a safe place for people to come and not have to worry about their safety, right? And that's number one. All right, to make sure that these kind of things don't happen. So while I'm not going to talk about sexual assault specifically in this program, I do want you to keep that in the back of your head as something to think about. Again, how do we create a safe atmosphere at our events to make sure things like that can't happen, right? And then the last thing I'll mention is themes, right? Another issue associated with parties. What themes are we coming up with for our events? This piece is kind of twofold, right? Because people can come up with really insensitive themes, for an event, or people can come up with themes that they think are fairly appropriate, and maybe they are, but the way that people decide to use that theme in terms of like costume or something like that, those things can be inappropriate. So we also have to kind of think about what's step two. Okay, we came up with a theme, but what might people do to kind of represent that theme in a way that can be inappropriate, and we have to watch out for that too, because we don't want that represented at our events either, right? So worst case scenario, these are some of the things that I came up with that are typically we see as issues around parties and events involving alcohol, right? So how do we avoid any of these from happening, right? So what we're talking about here is mitigation of any of these things from happening. We're never going to be able to create a perfect scenario where none of these things are ever going to happen, right? I'd love to say that a fight's never going to break out at a party, but fights break out everywhere. And we can't control other people's actions, but we can watch out for these things and we can take them under our control if they happen, right? So this is about, worst case scenario. Here are the things we need to think about and to ensure these things, almost never happen. Okay. So I broke it down in kind of 4 steps for a successful event. Step 1 is obviously the planning stage. What do we need to do to have a successful event, right? To actually think this through, to come up with a plan. How often are our chapters really doing that, right? I'm going to bet, right, that we kind of just have events and we kind of do what we did last time, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of deal. But I think we need to do a step further and really think a little bit more clear about how we're going to mitigate risk at our events, right? Just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen eventually. So if we're not doing everything we can to mitigate that risk, right, we're doing a disservice to our organization and our members and for our guests that are attending the party. 2 is education. How do I get my members and guests to understand and agree to our policies, right? So you have a plan that you put in step 1, but how are you going to get people to understand in step 2 what that plan is, what kind of things that you are doing as an organization to kind of mitigate risk? What are you going to allow and not allow at your events? And how are you going to educate people on those things? Number 3 is actual facilitation of the event. You've done the planning, you've told everybody what the rules are and kind of educated them on why, and now you're actually going to manage the event. What are the members of our organization actually doing to make sure the event runs smoothly, right? How are we making sure people are following the rules and we're holding them accountable? And then step 4 is assessment. And this is a piece where, I usually kind of ask, kind of force this on you by doing a post-event report, which I think is important because I want you to think about how that event went. Not to just go on with your weekend, go on with your week, and then get ready for the next party. It's important to think about what we can do better next time. Okay. And I'll talk about some of the things that I've seen in the past on those post-event reports that kind of talk about things that you have identified, what you can do better. And I'll share those with you later. So let's talk about that planning step. Step number 1, the key to proper planning is the difference between knowing policy versus understanding safety and liability, right? I can regurgitate to you all day what the policies are at Stockton, what the policies are within the councils, of what by rules, what you're supposed to do, not do, right? And I'm sure that you can regurgitate those back to me for the most part. And that's great. Memorization, right, is fine. But I don't want you to memorize what the policies are. Yes, I don't want you to break the policies, but the more important thing is that you actually understand why those policies exist, right? Why those rules exist. And they exist, right, because of safety and liability, right? Again, a lot of policies are put in place for your benefit, okay? So let's talk about what some of those things are. The first one, I have open party versus invite only. Right. So, what are the pros and cons of having an open party versus invite only? So first of all, an open party is against the policy of your organization, your council, fraternity and sorority life, and Stockton University, right? First and foremost. But that's not the important part. The important part is understanding why open parties are not allowed. So why are open parties not allowed? Okay, I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And why invite only parties are the way to go. Serving alcohol to your guests versus BYOB, right? We're not allowed to serve alcohol to our guests. We are not a alcohol distributor, so we have to have guests bring their own alcohol to the party. It takes the liability off of us because they're consuming their own alcohol that they purchased. Free versus fees. That's another important one, all right? We can't sell alcohol because we are not, all right, licensed to do so, right? And there's no loopholes around that either. In the past, I've seen, have conversations with people who are like, well, we aren't actually selling the beer or selling the drinks. What we were doing was having people pay at the door to get in. Well, if people are paying at the door to get in order to get access to alcohol, maybe the alcohol is free, but you paid to get in. Well, technically, then you paid for the alcohol, right? So there's no loopholes around that. You can't pay for a cup, right? And then say that alcohol is free. You can't pay to get in and then say the alcohol is free. If there's a transaction of money where you receive alcohol, then you're paying for the alcohol, period. Right? That's how a lawyer is going to see it. That's how a judge is going to see it, court of law, right? So again, liability reasons, safety reasons, you want to stay away from distributing alcohol to anyone and especially charging them for it. Underage consumption. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that people under the age of 21 do not consume alcohol, right? Statistically, I think something like 60% of college students under the age of 21 consume alcohol on a regular basis, right? At least once every week or so, right? So, that being said, what I will tell those that are underage is to drink responsibly, to, make sure you understand what you are drinking, how much you're drinking. That goes for everyone who's 21 up as well, right? But for those that are hosting the events, hosting a party, if you're fraternity and sorority hosting an event, when you allow those that are 21 and allow those that are 20 and younger to consume alcohol, you are therefore responsible, right, for the fact that they are drinking. So you can be held liable for allowing underage drinking, okay? And somebody had to furnish that alcohol to them because they couldn't buy it. So you could also be held responsible for furnishing that alcohol to a minor, right? And these are things where you will receive serious fines, have to go to court, right? And it'll be on your record, right? These are things that are against the law. So important to think about. And then from a Stockton perspective, you're going to get in trouble at the university too. I don't want anyone to get in trouble, but you're going to have to deal with the police and you're going to have to deal with the school. Underage consumption is really serious. So I'll just leave it at that. And then overconsumption. Okay. So this goes kind of in connection with the serving alcohol versus BYOB. BYOB is what we should be doing, unless of course we're a third party vendor, which means, we have an event, it might be at a local bar or something like that. And then it's the bar that is responsible for not over serving, for checking IDs and most of the liabilities on them, right? You're following the rules of the bar. But going back to the idea of serving alcohol or BYOB, we should never let someone bring in, a whole case of beer for themselves because, then you're at the risk of overconsumption. BYOB means you bring a 6-pack of beer, right? You bring a 6-pack of drinks under 15% alcohol, right? The universal rule is that anything that is 15% and under is okay. If it's over 15%, then it is an issue. That is the rule. You'll be held accountable for that rule. But more importantly, that issue exists again for safety reasons, because anything that's over that, then you're going to be at risk for people getting way too drunk and get into issues of alcohol poisoning and other issues related to overconsumption. So again, you don't want to be held responsible for that. You want your events to be safe. You want your guests to be safe and for no issues to happen. So overconsumption is also an issue. Okay. So to go more into detail about all those pieces, right? Open party versus invite party we'll start with. So who do you want in your space? So in an open party, most disturbances come from those that are uninvited, right? If you only invite your friends to your party, then you kind of trust your friends, their behaviors, right? You invite people to your party that you trust. That's really important thing about having an invite only event. If you have an open party, I understand the mentality, right? We're going to have an open party and, people are going to find out it's going to be this big blowout. It's going to be a blast. And, people are going to look to our organization like we're awesome because we had this huge party. Great. Right. But, what does that say about your ability to keep your guests safe, to know what's going on around you? If it's an open party, right, you can try to keep the guest count down to whatever you want it to, but 500 people are going to show up. That was a serious problem in the past at our university. I think you've all done a wonderful job in ensuring that that has really stopped or at least dwindled down. We don't have 500 people randomly showing up to our house. Who wants random people to show up to our house, right? Most disturbances come from those uninvited because guess what? They don't know you. They came to your party for the alcohol and for the experience. They don't care about you. They don't care about your house. You're going to see more issues of property damage. You're going to see more issues of overconsumption. All those things that I just went over on the last page, you're going to see a lot more of those issues if you have an open party, period. Because it's typically not your best friend that you invited to the party, who's causing the issues. It's those random people, right? So that's number one, most important. Space capacity, right? You don't want to have an open party because you might not even have the space for it. Nobody wants to be packed like a sardine in a hot basement with no ventilation. That's a safety issue in itself, but that also makes it not as fun, right? And you don't know half the people there, and it becomes weird too. Parties are more fun when you know everybody that's there, right? It's kind of a shared experience. And then the guest lists, right? Which is also important. So if you're going to have an invite only party, you want to have a guest list. You want to know who's going to show up and you want to cross them off that list, right? So you don't allow other random people. People might show up to your door and be like, hey, I'm friends with Joe. Joe told me to come. Well, you know what? You're going to get a lot of that if you allow that. So you have to stay to the guest list and say, you're not on the list. Unfortunately, you can't come in, and you do that because, again, you want to mitigate the having 500 people show up and do the same thing. You want to mitigate any of those issues. And I went over on the last page, right? It's important to know who's in your house, who's in your backyard, who's at your event, right? To mitigate all those reasons. Okay. Serving alcohol versus BYOB. So who's responsible for what I drink? So I said earlier that when you furnish alcohol, you're responsible for the effects of that alcohol. So it doesn't matter what kind of alcohol it is. If you're going to either distribute alcohol for free or to sell it to people, all right, you are responsible for the effects of that alcohol. So whether it's at that party and they get sick, they overconsume, they end up in the hospital, you are responsible. If they drink too much and get into a car accident because of a DUI, you are responsible because you are the one that furnished that alcohol. Same thing with a bar. If a bar, right, who is licensed, who has insurance for these things, over pours, gives people too much alcohol, they get in a car accident, guess what? That bar is being sued. They're probably going to lose their liquor license or get serious fines because they gave too much alcohol to a person, resulting in their impairment. So the same thing happens to you. Doesn't matter that you're not a bar. In fact, it'll be a lot worse because you're doing something illegal, right? In furnishing that alcohol and overpouring, right? I'm going to go over those liabilities in a few minutes so you know specifically what they look like. But that's something to seriously think about. So again, free versus fees. Can I make money from my party? That's usually the big question. Exchanging money for access to alcohol is not only against policy, but it's against the law. Again, I said before, you don't have a license, a permit to sell alcohol. In fact, alcohol licenses to sell alcohol in New Jersey are upwards of $1 million. You don't have that. So, if you think licenses are $1 million, how much do you think the fines and the lawsuits are related to selling alcohol for profit when you don't have a license? So that's not something you want to get into. Exchanging money for access to alcohol is always a problem. Again, doesn't matter if it's at the door, you're selling a cup, there's no loopholes here, right? If there's an exchange of money and people get alcohol, you're selling alcohol, period, against the law. Can I sell food? So this question often comes up. So if I'm having a big, backyard party during warm weather, and we decide we want to have a barbecue, it's BYOB, people are bringing their own drinks, but you want to charge $5 at the door to get in because you get access to hamburgers and hot dogs and soda and stuff like that. Can you do that? My answer to that is yes. I am perfectly fine with that. Again, and I think anyone would be fine with that. It's not about me. What you really want to think about there is, what is the exchange of money for? If the exchange of money is for food, right? That's fine. I'm not going to argue with you. I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. I think that's fine. Do I think that you still need to provide some kind of food for free to your guests? I do. So that's the caveat here, right? If you're going to host an event where people are come drinking at your house, you have to provide them water and you have to provide them pretzels or something like that, right? That's the cost of doing business, guys. So if you're going to have a party with 200 people, whether it's a mixer or an invite, whatever, and you have 200 people at your house, make sure you have enough bags of pretzels and water for those folks, period. Okay. But if you wanted to do something where you got some more real food and you wanted to charge $5, $6 at the door or charge per hamburger or hot dog, that's fine. I don't care. I don't think anybody's going to argue that. So go for it. Underage consumption I mentioned before, right? It's college, right? Everyone drinks underage. Whether you want to argue that's the case or not doesn't not make it against the law. So what I want to focus here is host responsibility. It doesn't matter if they brought their own alcohol. If they're drinking underage at your event on your premises, then you are responsible for that happening. So as a host, you are responsible. Doesn't matter if they brought their own drinks or if someone's sneaking them drinks, okay? You are responsible. So I really want you to think about that. And for those that are underage and drink, again, it's against the law. You're not supposed to be doing it. If you choose to do that and take that risk, be responsible, all right? Know the effects of that alcohol. Overconsumption. It's still college, right? Still a bad idea, right? We want to stay away from allowing people to get incredibly impaired in a situation where it results in fighting, in someone, getting into any kind of harassment or altercation, getting in a car, things like that. Overconsumption should never be happening at any of our events, right? And that's why BYOB is important. Stick to that 6 drink, under 15% rule. No one should be able to get completely plastered, and that's important, right? Again, it's your responsibility. If you allow people to get blasted at your party and then something happens, you can end up in court. Very serious, right? Point blank, you could, get suspended as an organization. You can lose your recognition at Stockton too. And then you personally, whoever's hosting the party, whoever's on a lease at that house, right? Again, just like any of these things, you can be held responsible. So you need to think about that. So I do want to talk to you about what the liability actually looks like if you're thinking about that. So there's 2 types of liability. There's civil liability and there's criminal liability. Most likely, if anything happens and someone comes after you, it's going to be civil liability, but it could be criminal. So civil liability allows individuals to bring suits against, people, in your case, a social host. Lawsuits can be filed by innocent victims injured by an intoxicated person, right? So maybe someone is completely sober at your party, but they get punched in the face by someone at your party, right? Guess who's getting sued? You are. You hosted the event. It happened at your event. Okay. Or the intoxicated person themselves. Maybe someone gets really drunk at your party because of overconsumption. They fall down your stairs, they get hurt, something like that. Guess who's getting sued? You are. Juries typically award monetary damages to the victims to punish the offender in these cases. So you really need to think about that stuff. Again, how do we make our events as safe as possible? And we try to mitigate any of these things from happening. All right. And so examples here, there's dram shop laws, common negligence laws, and social host laws that exist. Each is different in every state. New Jersey has a lot of laws around civil liability in regards to responsibility. New Jersey's pretty strict about it. So this is the last place that you want to get into any of these issues. And then there's criminal liability, right? Again, like civil liability, but actual goes to criminal case. It addresses the criminal aspect of serving alcohol irresponsibly. So in the case of selling alcohol, particularly to minors, you bet you're going to end up in a criminal case. You committed a crime, right? These things can actually result in jail time. That's the last thing you want to be involved in. By the way, if someone were to get seriously injured or die as a result of something involving your party, it can result obviously in jail time. We're talking really seriously here, folks. So you really need to think about this stuff. I know there's a mindset sometimes that it's college, everyone has parties, everyone drinks, this stuff's kind of normal. No one's ever going to get hurt here. It's not going to happen to us. It happens, and no one ever thinks it's going to happen, right? No one ever sets out for this stuff to happen at their events, at their parties, right? To think that other fraternities at other schools and other places are more crazy than us, and that's why those things happen. Trust me, they think the same thing, and then things happen. So you really need to think about these really seriously. So planning for our space, this is important too, right? So where you're having the event is extremely important. So again, I'm talking here about BYOB, if it's third-party vendor, again, that really falls on the third-party vendor, whether it's, you're holding it at a winery or a bar or one of those types of places, country club. But you're thinking about, we're talking here about your house, your apartment, your backyard, right? So what's the capacity or fire code? Now, if you're in a private residence, there probably is no fire code. You can't invite the fire department to your house and ask them to measure what the general capacity is. They can't do that, right? You're not a business. So that being said, you kind of just need to understand how many people can safely fit in my basement, how many people can safely fit in my living room or first floor of our house, and, it not be an issue in case, it becomes too hot and people pass out. There's a fire and we all need to get out immediately. Again, we never think these things are going to happen, but they do. So if you're not planning for these things, that is a problem. That is a mistake. Right? So figure out what's a safe number of people that can fit in this space and go with that. Okay. I can't give you any measurement or a way to think any safer than that, but that's really what it comes down to. Okay. Can people get out of here safely if something were to happen? Are exits well lit and easy to find? And this kind of goes to the first one, right? So if people enter your house and they don't know how to get out, that's a problem, right? So you need to have a space that allows people to, for ventilation, for people to find an exit to get out of the house in a fairly quick manner, right? And it needs to be well lit. If your entire house is dark, we like to have parties where it's dark and we have all kinds of like cool lighting and stuff, give it a club effect. That's great. But if your exits aren't well lit and people can't find them easily, that's a problem. Are other parts of the house off limits, locked, and monitored? This is extremely important. And this is where I'm going to go back to that first slide where I mentioned sexual assault. Again, an issue that we never think is going to happen with our event, an issue that we never think is going to happen with our fraternity or sorority, but it happens. So what are we doing in terms of managing our event to mitigate even a sexual assault from occurring? Okay. So if we have a space that we're using for the party, it's important for the monitors that are part of our organization to make sure that other spaces are off limits, including our own members, right? So if we're having a party at, our own house, if the party's at my house, I shouldn't even be allowed to go up to my bedroom, right? It should be a rule for our organization that even our own personal spaces are off limits for the events. And there's two reasons for that, right? One, what's to stop me from slipping up to my room and taking shots and getting more inebriated than, I should be, right? Because that'll go against my own organization's policies and safety and stuff like that. And two, what's going to stop me, or someone else from going up into those spaces and doing something, even worse, right? And we get into sexual assault. By the way, the majority of sexual assaults that occur, in fraternity houses, around fraternity houses, happen because of these reasons, right? Obviously the person who was the assaulter is 100% at fault and responsible, right? But we want to ensure that we're not providing any help in those things happening, right? We want to stop those things from happening and be able to be good bystanders in making sure that we don't allow someone to walk off into another part of our house or things like that, or go on the side of the house outside and things like that. We want to be able to monitor all spaces to ensure that everyone is being safe. That's extremely important. So make sure those other parts of the house are off limits. We should be locking our doors. So if you're living in a house where, the doors aren't locked, make sure you get, locks for those doors. And you want to have, again, some of those sober monitors that are kind of at those spots, ensuring that people aren't going to those other spaces. Okay, extremely important. I can't go over that enough. Really think about that for your events. And again, another thing is people can't walk into your bedroom and steal your stuff. All right, if that helps you think about it. Okay. And also planning for your space. Is it going to be noisy? Right? Yeah, we're going to be blasting music in our basement. I get it. It's college. It's fun. It's a party. But if it's 2 a.m. and you have next door neighbors, we have to think about how we're being good neighbors, because you can't go over to your neighbor, when they call the cops and be like, hey, it's college. We're having a party. We're having a good time. I know you have work tomorrow, but, deal with it. No, that's extremely obnoxious and rude. Okay. And you also can't just do that and then tell your neighbors you're sorry. Like, sorry doesn't cut it, folks. You need to be better neighbors. If it were me and I know that I was going to have 100 people over in my house, which I would never do, that's something you don't do after college. I would go over to my neighbors, say, hey, we're going to have an event tonight. Just want to let you know, if it gets too loud or there are any issues, here's my cell phone number. Please call me immediately. We're going to do everything we can to ensure that X, Y, and Z doesn't happen. Have those relationships with your neighbors. Okay. If it were me, again, I wouldn't be having parties in a suburban neighborhood where you have people living on both sides of you, because you're just asking for issues. Okay. And it is your fault and your responsibility if those issues occur. So you really need to seriously think about that. Okay. Again, unfortunately, these issues happen fairly often. Nobody wants a fraternity or sorority to be living next door to them. Period. I'm a Greek advisor, and I don't think I would want a fraternity living next door. Okay. Because it's going to be loud at some point. It is, and that's the reality of it. But that's not okay. So you need to think about that. So you need to have strong relationships with your neighbors if you have them, and then think twice about where you can even have your parties. All right. Because we need to be good citizens, good neighbors, good people, right? We need to own up to our mistakes. We need to take responsibility for these things. Okay. Planning for our guests. So are we checking IDs for those that are 21? My answer is you should be. Again, you shouldn't be allowing people under the age of 21 to be consuming alcohol at your party, at your event, on your premises. You want to be checking IDs. You want to provide wristbands to people. Okay. I know some folks provide wristbands ahead of time, and that's kind of their official invite to the party. So it's easy to know who's supposed to be at your party and who's not. Give different color wristbands. Give green wristbands to those that are 21. Give blue wristbands to those that are 20 and younger. Whatever is going to work for you, that's fine with me. You just need to make sure that that's something you're thinking about. And do we have water and snacks free and accessible? I said that before. It's great if you sell food. That's fine. I don't care. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to have free and accessible water and pretzels or snacks for people. Okay. And if you have 200 people in your living room, folks, and you have 1 case of water and 1 bag of pretzels, do you think that's going to be enough? I said before I was going to mention some of the feedback I've received from people over the past couple of years involving, post-event reports, and that is the number one thing that comes up. If you were going to have 200 people at your house for a party, right, which could simply be a mixer, right, because that's how many people are in some of our organizations. You can have 2 chapters and still be 200 people. I get it. But if you want to hold those events, you need to be responsible hosts, and you need to have water. You need to have snacks, right? If it's a mixer and it's probably at one of the guys' houses, the fraternity men's houses, right? Sorority women, it's your responsibility to have that stuff too. If you're a co-host, it doesn't matter if the party's at, John and Mike's house. The sorority should be equally responsible for having water and snacks there too. So if you each want to throw in $30 and buy cases of water and pretzels for the party, that's what you do. And that's, again, the cost of doing business. You want to have parties, you have to do these things. Okay. I don't want to find out that someone, drank too much or X, Y, and Z happened and they didn't really have access to water or couldn't, eat pretzels or anything like that. So, you got to really think about these things and make sure our guests are safe and having a good time. So planning for our members, right? Just because we have 50 guys in our fraternity doesn't mean all 50 guys get the party that night. Right? Somebody needs to be sober. A bunch of people need to be sober. We need them having different jobs, different roles at the party to make sure things are going well. So that's important too. Planning our theme. If we have one, is it appropriate? I mentioned that before. Not just is the theme appropriate, but are people going to take the theme and do things that are inappropriate? Right. I know that kind of takes a little bit extra thinking, but there are certainly situations where I've seen that kind of stuff happen. Education. How do we create a culture of safety and security surrounding our parties? Is our chapter or guests responsible? Right. Guess what? Your chapter is responsible for guest behavior. So if you're the host of the event, you're always going to be responsible for what happens to the guests. Even if it's the guests that are causing issues, you're going to be responsible. Okay. What are the expectations of members? Right. Again, we talked about those roles. What are our rules? Right. And if we see something, what do I do? So these are all things you need to go over with your chapter, and all rules that the guests of your party need to know as well. All right. You need to educate them. You can't just expect people to know what the policies are. And then facilitating the actual event. So people are arriving. Now what? Where do we go from here? So again, it's your members knowing what their roles are, knowing what the schedule is like, if you're going to rotate people at the door or whatever, so what are our roles? So now I'm going to go over those roles and what they are. So sober monitors. I know a lot of organizations have their national headquarters provide some education around this. Some don't. So I'm going to go over this a little bit. So how many monitors are needed for our event? Again, I don't have a good number for that, but I would say that for every 25 people at your event, you should have one sober monitor. So if you have 200 people at your event, do the math, 8 sober monitors, all right, stationed around the house in some capacity. So that's something you need to think about. If you're having a mixer, again, it should be 4 people from one organization, 4 people from the other. We need to play fair here and think about those things. How are those people chosen? So I don't know what your organization wants to do. If people are on rotation, who has to be a sober monitor? Maybe it's those that are not 21. You do it by volunteering, whatever the case is, but make sure it's fair within your organization who's chosen to be the sober monitors. And how are they trained? Just telling people you're the sober monitor, so just stand here and look out for things. That's not much of a training, is it? So you need to go over in detail about where people are going to be stationed, what it is they're going to be looking out for. Again, what are all the rules, the do's and do nots, and make sure they, maybe they're trained in bystander behavior. Maybe they do tips training. These are some really great opportunities for them to become better sober monitors. And I'd recommend those things for every member of every chapter. What do they wear so they're easily identifiable? This is something I don't think a lot of people do, but I really highly encourage you to do so. Just like having well-lit doors and people knowing where the exits are, the same thing. People should know who the sober monitors are. So if an issue comes up at a party, I can look around the room, know exactly who to go up to and report the issue, right? That's really important. Where should our sober monitors be stationed? That's important, right? I mentioned blocking off the parts of the house that they're not supposed to be at. So make sure you have sober monitors that are there, kind of acting as doormen, as bouncers to make sure that they're not letting people there. Obviously, people at the door, different locations around the house where you could foresee issues happening. One person at least in every room that you're going to have people in, so that everyone can be monitored at the same time. And then again, them understanding their responsibilities through that training. Door people, right? So who's checking the actual guest list? I mentioned before, you're going to have an event at your house. It should be BYOB. You should have a guest list. You should know who's going to be there. It should be invite only. So who's actually at the door checking that guest list, right? And it may be, checking for people's wristbands and having a list of them, checking their IDs, they're 21 or under 21, making sure people don't switch wristbands, whatever it's you're going to do, but those are things you need to think about. And then who's responsible for the alcohol that comes in the door? So again, it's BYOB. Are we allowing people to just walk in with their 6-pack of drinks and walk around with it? I know that that's what a lot of you do. And I'm going to tell you that's a really bad idea. Why is that a bad idea? Because that allows people to then share their alcohol. That allows people underage to get access to alcohol a lot easier. That allows people to get their alcohol stolen, right? Again, it's access to alcohol because it's all around. You're not going to be standing there holding it the entire time. I know you're going to be putting it down. That's a concern. So what really should you be doing as an organization that's hosting an event is, whether you use, extra, fridges or something, or, your cold garage, whatever it is, but you should have a place where you store everybody's beer or alcohol. You label it, right? Whether you put a piece of tape in their name or whatever you want to do, but that way, people can come, give you their ID, grab one of the beers that they brought, give it to them, and you need a bartender that runs that process. I know that might seem silly to a lot of you, and you just want to allow people to walk around with their own beer and be responsible for it. But then again, you're responsible for everything that's happening, so you want to think about those things, okay? Plus, I know it might seem silly, but it kind of gives your party the atmosphere of being like a bar. If you actually have a setup where people have to come up and get a drink and stuff like that, and I don't know, I just think that's cool. So it's something to think about. The bartender, right? So I just mentioned that. Do we monitor the alcohol and distribute it back to its owners, right? I want you to seriously think about that. I think it's a good process to make sure that beer and alcohol isn't being shared. People are not over consuming. Again, a lot of those things I talked about early on that we want to be concerned about. This is one of those things where we can allow it to happen or not allow it to happen if we allow people just to walk around with all this alcohol. The assessment piece. So that went well. Could have gone better, right? I ask you all to complete that post-event report at the end of every event. But what can we do better for next time? Sometimes those reports say the event went great, I have nothing to report. I want you to think a little bit more critically about those things. By the way, if you talk to me about an event, or you put it in the post-event report that this could have gone better, this could have gone better, this could have gone better, I'm not going to come down on you. I'm going to say good for you for identifying those things. Let's talk about how you can help mitigate this next time, and we're going to go from there. Unless you're reporting to me that a crime was committed, I'm here to be your advisor and support you. So let's figure out together how we're going to make your event safer. Period. That's what's important to me. So don't be afraid to ever come talk to me about those things. Put things in the post-event report that you want to talk about and get some advice on, right? My job's not to yell at you. My job's to support you, make sure that you can have safe events, because that's all I want, right, is for you to have safe events. So let's talk a little bit about bystander intervention here. So a big role of those sober monitors, and for you all as hosts of an event, is to be good bystanders for your event, right? You're really not even bystanders, you're good hosts, but this is important for you to understand, for everyone to understand who's going to be a part of, attending any party, particularly in college when alcohol is involved. So, we want you to step up and step in. So we do offer bystander intervention training at Stockton. We have different programs, including Green Dot. I highly recommend Green Dot. It's a great program. I'm certified to train in Green Dot. So, that's something you should think about and participating in. So a little bit about what Green Dot does is actually what I'm going to talk about right now. Knowing when to respond. So if you see something, say something, do something, right? So we might be talking about a situation where, again, people are over consuming alcohol at your event, or perhaps you see something shady where you think some sexual harassment or sexual assault might be going down, right? Anything, you think a fight's going to break out, you want to be able to step in and stop the situation from occurring, right? We all play a role in that. We all shouldn't be noticing something happening and looking at each other like who's going to do something. I know it's really hard sometimes in those situations, but I want to empower all of you to feel confident in stepping in and doing something in any of these situations. We all play a role. So the first thing I know you're going to ask yourself is if it's safe to intervene. Sometimes you might see a situation occurring and you don't want to get involved because you don't want to get punched in the face, right? I get that, right? So that's something that you need to think about and ask yourself if it's safe to intervene. And that goes to the three things you need to think about in terms of intervening in a situation, is whether you're going to think about distraction, directing, or delegating, right? If you feel like it's unsafe for you personally to intervene, you might direct someone else to do it, or delegate someone else to do it. So that's really important in this concept. So bystander intervention. So if you've decided that you can safely intervene in a situation, you can create a distraction in an indirect or non-confrontational way. You can disrupt the situation just by talking, like striking up a conversation about anything to help keep a potentially dangerous situation from escalating. Your goal is to prevent a situation from getting worse, or better yet, buy enough time to check in with the potential victim and ask them if they're okay. All right. So that's one method, is distracting. The second method is the most straightforward approach, is actually stepping in, directly in, intervening to prevent a problem situation from occurring. And again, that could be, hey, I've noticed you've been drinking too much. I'm going to cut you off right now. Let's put this alcohol down. Let's get you some water, right? Directly intervening. Or delegating. If you don't feel comfortable directly talking with someone or distracting them, look for someone else who might be able to help you intervene. Power in numbers can be one of the most valuable tools, or you can look for someone else who might be in a better position to get involved. Tell chapter leadership or find a person's friends, right? If you're at an event and there's sober monitors, chapter leadership there are sober, these are the people you want to go to and talk to in terms of delegation, because they'll step in and solve the situation, help resolve the situation as quickly as they can. And it's important to think about. Right. So very quickly, those are just a couple things to think about. I highly recommend you go through Green Dot. I think it's an awesome bystander intervention program, and to think about these things in your organization. So again, I want to offer questions or comments, but there's nobody on here watching live. So what I'll say is I'm glad that you watched this video. I hope it was informative, particularly those that are newer to the fraternity and sorority community, or those that are just watching this that are not members of Greek Life, to kind of get an idea, because all college students like to attend parties, host parties, and that's fine. So what are we doing to kind of mitigate the risk, keep our events safe, but still have fun? So I'm glad you participated in this video today. I wish you all a wonderful day, and thanks for participating. Take care.